Hi, everybody. This is American Nana. I hope everybody is doing well today. I'm sure as many of you were curious about what the niece said. In case you have not heard it, I'm going to read a few. I'm going to read what a reporter had jotted down in notes. So bear with me as I do it because, yeah, just bear with me. Let me get it. Let me get it. Alright, so, oh, hold on. Jeez, why do I do this? Okay. So the niece is now 17. She was 14 at the time of O'Keefe's of um this is their writing. I'm just going to read what they wrote and how they wrote it. Let me start over since now I've explained what it is I'm doing. You have to bear with me. I wasn't feeling well yesterday and today I'm still kind of The niece is now 17 years old. She was 14 at the time of O'Keefe's death, I believe is what was meant to say. She left that word out. She was questioned by Assistant District Attorney Laura McLaughlin. She has a brother who's 3 years younger. She plays softball, still lives at O'Keefe's home with her grandparents. She called her uncle JJ. McLaughlin asks the niece to point out Reed. The niece looks at Reed from the corner of her eye and says she's wearing blue. The niece says after Reed started dating O'Keefe again in 2020, she stayed over about once a week, later daily. Says she would get food and go shopping with Reed. When asked about her relationship with Reed, the niece pauses before saying that on some days they were on a good standard, but not others. She would kind of like not ignore me, but it felt like a coldness towards me. Reed listens to the niece. She has no expression on her face, holds a finger to her left ear. The niece says Reed's SUV had a screen that showed the backup camera. Okay, most of us do have cars like that. Denise said O'Keefe and Reed's relationship changed at the end of 2021. They were fighting a lot, she says, usually like more towards night. Says O'Keefe seemed frustrated while talking to Reed on the phone. She was very upset, angry. The niece says of Reed, her voice louder than her uncle's. I'm thinking that was 2022 and they said 2021. The judge instructs the jurors about upcoming testimony, says it can only be used to determine Reed's state of mind. Several young people, early teens, are crowded onto the benches where the O'Keefe family sits. The niece describes a New Year's trip to Aruba where she says she witnessed a fight in her hotel room. Says her uncle came in and told her brother to get off his iPad. Says Reed then entered, stood up for the brother. Then he said Reed started yelling that he had kissed someone else. Says JJ started saying it didn't happen. Says Reed was very loud and very upset. Niece says O'Keefe came into her room and fell asleep in her bed. Niece says there were more fights when they returned home to Canton. She referred to Reed as the defendant in her testimony. I remember him say that their relationship was good but had run its course. She said Reed was upset. O'Keefe asked her to leave. She did not want to leave. Says O'Keefe then more aggressively asked her to leave. It was more like stern, she said. Says Reed followed O'Keefe upstairs. He wouldn't let her into the bedroom. She began to bang on its door. I'm sure a lot of people have had that happen, right? I mean, this is a child. She was 14. I'm sorry, these are my. She was 14 years old. I cannot believe they put her on the stand. I would tell that there were like tension, she says. They were cold towards each other. Says the tension surfaced a couple times per week. She said she heard Reed on the phone saying she and her brother were worried. Heard O'Keefe said it's run its course. On 1/28/22, she and a friend were celebrating getting into a private high school. Her younger brother had gone to a sleepover. O'Keefe went out, sent her a text asking if she was okay. Per house rules, she plugged in her phone in her uncle's room and went to bed. Niece said Reed woke her up at 4:30 a.m. She was yelling to wake up. She said that O'Keefe had not come home. She was very like frantic, as one would be, right? Niece says Reed asked her to use her phone to text O'Keefe. No response. Says Reed was on her phone, remained frantic. Says Reed asked for phone numbers, asked her to call Jen McCabe. She put the phone on speaker and handed it to Reed. Reed told McCabe O'Keefe had not come home. McLaughlin asked if the niece heard Reed say anything else. There's a long pause before she says yes. The defendant was asking what could have happened, Denise says she said things like, "Could I have done something? Could he have gotten hit by a plow?" McLaughlin asked her about the previous testimony. She also testified at the first trial, then hands her a transcript to review. Reed said several things, including it was like, maybe I hit him. She says she heard that statement just once. Says Reed remained frantic. She said that she had dropped him off. McLaughlin begins to ask if Reed said anything about the arguments. Defense attorney David Gennady objects, and the judge sustains. Then he said she had never seen Reed as frantic as she was that morning. She says Reed left for Jim McCabe's house about 20 to 30 minutes later, then returned with McCabe and Carrie Roberts. Describes McCabe as the mother of a childhood friend and her basketball coach. Says that both McCabe and Roberts were friends with O'Keefe. Says she still has a relationship with McCabe today. After the three women arrived, the niece says McCabe came into her room to comfort her. Says McCabe was very level headed and Reed was still very frantic. Says Reed did not try to comfort her. Hmm. Maybe because Reed was just confused as to all get out as to what was going on, possibly. And she's not a mother. You know, who can say what you're going to do in a time like that? She cared for the children deeply, but she's reacting in her own to her own. What's the word? Um, Trauma, what's going on right now, the fear that she's feeling right now. She is not thinking of anyone else. That's just how I get it. I think that um, it you have to learn how to process things when you have children so that when there is a situation, you don't throw them in it. But even if you've learned that over the years, there's times that it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So, let's see. I'm not sure if I've read this part yet. Geez, sorry, guys. Okay, I don't know. Yeah, let me read this whole comment. 11/22/23. 11/22. All right. I read a portion of this, so I'm going to read this one again. The niece says Reed returned later in the day with her father and brother. She met them before. They didn't stay very long. Says Reed told her and her grandfather that she felt like she was living in a nightmare. Does that make perfect sense to try to figure out where Karen Reed's thought process was? And she was talking to John's father. McLaughlin asks if Reed ever comforted her during this time. Yannetti objects. Judge tells jurors to disregard. There was a sidebar. During the sidebar, the niece smiles and says something to the court reporter. She smiles over at her family. A court officer warns someone seated with the Reed family they are not allowed to eat in the courtroom. After the sidebar, the judge tells jurors they cannot consider the niece's statement about not being comforted by Reed. Yannetti begins his cross examination. He is speaking in a much softer voice than he has used with other witnesses. Notes that the niece did not use to call Reed the defendant, but instead called her Karen. Niece agrees that Reed took her to get her nails done once a week. I don't remember if she stayed with me. Yannetti asked if Reed took her to doctor's appointments, and she said no. Denise says Reed went to her sports games, went on a tour of the school with her, helped with a couple of school projects, sometimes straightened her hair the night before school, planned a scavenger hunt for one of her birthdays. Denise said she and her brother sometimes stayed with Reed at her home in Mansfield. Yannetti asked about the Aruba trip, asked if Denise remembers getting ice cream with Reed. She doesn't. She repeats that O'Keefe fell asleep in her bedroom. Says she left, came back later, and found her uncle was gone. And then she said, I had just gotten dumped by my eighth grade boyfriend. So I was at a crisis, Denise says. Slight laughter in the courtroom. I can imagine that as well. Niece says O'Keefe returned to the room. Reed followed. Reed was trying to stick up for her younger brother about the iPad. Niece was saying she never saw physical contact between Reed and O'Keefe. Says when they returned from Aruba, the couple's relationship had changed. It was about the same amount of time. It was the same amount of time, but it wasn't the same. Well, that was a hard one to read right there, but that's what it says. Yannetti steps away from the podium, whispers something to defense attorney Alan Jackson, then to defense attorney Robert Alessi. He's done with his questions. McLaughlin returns for redirect. Niece says this about the couple's relationship after Aruba. They just seem less happy to be around each other, she adds. There was a lot more tension and fighting, says the fighting in January of 2022 was more frequent than before. Oh, so earlier I said 2021 when and it should have been 2022. I was wrong. Jeez Louise. Yeah, towards the end of 2021 because that's when they started having some trouble. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm not going to go back and correct that. I'm just going to leave that like this, okay? Um, Yannetti returns for a second time. The niece looks down at the floor, not at Yannetti. He asks if Reed took her and her brother to Bruins came that month. She says yes. Her testimony concludes. Outside in the hallway, her aunt Erin O'Keefe hugs her and escorts her down the stairs. The other young people in the courtroom also filed out. So there you have it. That was from what I get, that was the testimony. Um, doesn't say much, and quite frankly, putting a child, I realize she's 17 now, but she was 14 at the time that she was making these decisions about an adult relationship and how it was going. There's no way this young lady knew that all the things that make up a relationship, let's say that. There's a lot of issues, and especially when you're with somebody that has children, you're gonna have disagreements. Um, I guess I could use real life as an example, right? So, my husband is my children's stepfather, but we don't ever refer to him as the stepfather. He's everything you would want a dad to be, honestly. Let's put it like this. My children and my husband have such a beautiful relationship that my son's only son, his firstborn child, he had, well, let's say, it gets confusing. My son married someone that already had 2 daughters, so he had bonus daughters. They together had a son. This is the only child that my son has actually fathered, and, he was named after my husband. There's a deep respect, a deep love that's there. Now, I in their relationship, my husband was a softie. I was hands down the disciplinary, and sometimes I had to get on to my husband because he would not follow my main thing with my children was grounding. I was beaten as a child. I don't spank. I don't disagree with being spanked. If that is how you discipline and you do so with love, and but I mean, I was beaten to the point that my mother used to brag about how far across the room she could backhand me, and all the adults in my life would laugh when my mother said that. So I thought that was just normal, you know. I mean, if every adult that's sitting there is laughing about it, why would you think something's wrong with it? But that's not how you treat children. You just don't. And my mother wasn't joking, she was serious. So I'm going to give the adults that were in my life back then the benefit of the doubt that they simply thought she was joking. Of course, over 65 years ago, CPS was barely a thought, if it was even anything, right? So, but when I disciplined stern and I mean, I held to what I said because consistency, in my opinion, is one of the biggest things that you have to do as a parent. Parenting nowadays, I'm not sure what I mean, there's just too much. There's too much out there for these kids. I watch my grandbabies and I'm like, oh my gosh, they shouldn't be able to see these things. But the bottom line is adults are going to disagree. And I'm going to just go out on a limb here. And from listening to the text messages from John O'Keefe to Karen Reed, it did appear that he was dealing and not very well with the fact that he's the bad guy and she's the fun one, you know? I mean, there were times I would get on to my husband and I'm like, you just you can't do this. I mean, it didn't take the kids long at all to learn go ask him, right? And he learned real quick that he better check with me. Always. I never told him he couldn't discipline them, but the check-in with me was to make sure that I didn't have any discipline that I was doing or was going to do for the situation. because, like I said, he was a softy. And, you can imagine our grandbabies. We were talking about it just yesterday. Our youngest one, we know she's our last grandbaby. She's lived here with her mama and brother and sister for, I'd say, all but 6 weeks, maybe, of her life. I think they came home when she was 6 weeks old. There were some problems, and my daughter got out of which she needed to get out of fast, so thank goodness for that. But, she's spoiled rotten. I mean, there's just no way about it. She's spoiled rotten to the point that she didn't really take anybody serious when they're saying no, you know? So there's a lot, and she's only 3, so she's fixing to turn 4. There's plenty of time, but we've realized that we have spoilt her immensely. The bottom line is children don't know adult relationships, and it appeared to me, just from the information, I'm going to say that I feel that possibly, John O'Keefe was a rather heavy drinker. I mean, the day he was going out, he messaged something about he had just sobered up. So he'd been drinking all day and got pretty wasted and sobered up and continued on for the night. You know, drinking normally creates problems for people. So if that's the case, a child isn't going to necessarily realize, um, either my uncle's drinking a lot or they're both drinking a lot. It's just not gonna register with a child as much. So those are just my opinions. I'm in awe that they put her on the stand. There's no reason to put her on the stand other than to try to pull sympathy, which in that situation, who wouldn't have sympathy for these children who've lost their mother and father within a few short months, and then a few years later lost their caregiver, their uncle, whom they adored. So putting her on the stand was not so much, in my opinion, to show that there was discourse going on in that relationship at that time. Putting her on the stand, in my opinion, was simply for, um, tugging at people's hearts, you know? Um, Honestly, I kinda could see from what I've heard of John O'Keefe, I could see him kissing this girl in Aruba. She would also deny it because she had a boyfriend, so there's no way she was gonna say that she did it, you know? So, but who knows? Nobody knows. I mean, the person involved does. John O'Keefe did, and Karen Reed does. So that's where you get the, you know what's going on. But it seems like a lot of the issues in their relationship had to do with when he was drinking. Most people have to agree that there there's a major difference between a person drinking and not drinking, especially when they've got a whole lot of stuff going on that they're muddling through their mind and they're afraid of. So, be that as it may, that was the testimony of the 17-year-old, and I'm just flabbergasted that they felt it was the right thing to do to put her on the stand. I don't know who else agrees, but that testimony to me just shows a child that witnessed an adult relationship that was having ups and downs. And whenever he asked Karen Reed to leave and she wouldn't, and they were fighting and she was yelling and banging on the door, well, she kept coming back and he kept asking her to. So there's that. And I hope that the defense pulls that out at some point. Their relationship was not over, but it was at a crossroads. And blaming Karen Reed for acting like a teenager and messaging Brian Higgins because she was hurt and upset, that's what many people would do. So, um, those are my thoughts. That was the testimony as reported, and I'm sure you only listened to just the testimony, but that was it. So I hope y'all all have a good day, and I hope you stay safe and uh, best of health to everyone. Thank you. Bye.